Hello and welcome to another edition of the Middle East Report. In this programme, we'll be focusing on the suffering and the plight of the captured Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit, who has just celebrated his 25th birthday. And this also marks his 6th year in captivity since he was kidnapped by Hamas. And he's been denied access by the International Red Cross to visit him by Hamas. So to discuss this issue that is very, very close to the hearts of so many Israelis and also the Jewish community around the world, this programme is a tribute to Gilad Shalit. For today's programme, I am joined by Professor Hemda Galik. She is a relative of Shalit and also a university lecturer here in England, and also Jeff Lone, who's head of mission for the International Committee for the Red Cross based in London. Hello to you both and welcome to the Middle East Report. Hemda, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and also how the capture of Gilad Shalit has really changed your life?
Well, I lived in this country for the last 37 years, so I'm very comfortable in here, but kept a very strong link with my family in Israel. All my family lives in Israel. And Gilad's father is my cousin. The family's been in Israel for many years, since the late 20s, 1920s, and were very active and participated in everything that happened to Israel and the Jewish people since then. It's a very large family in the country, but Noam, Gilad's father, only had one brother, twin brother, who was killed in the Yom Kippur War in 1973. And Gilad's elder brother is named after him. And because I lived here for all these years, I used to see them when I visited or when they visited me, family occasions, generally on the whole, on happy occasions, but sometimes, things happen. Since Gilad captured, something happened to the whole family. Sort of life stopped a little bit, came to a halt. We don't have these happy meetings so much anymore. We just wait and hope all the time that things will improve. It sort of stops something developing in our lives, I think. And we are sitting here and waiting for him.
And you've taken a proactive stance, haven't you, and really raising his profile in this country and raising awareness of his plight.
I'm trying, but I'm sure I could be better at it. And I'm doing it with the help of many friends, both in the Jewish community and in the Christian community, who really been touched by Gilad's plight and came together out of something in their heart to help. So we try to raise the awareness of his suffering. His suffering is really terrible. And we try and organize events and try and talk to people. We stand outside our parliament. We have a permission to have a small presence outside parliament every anniversary, every 100 days, birthdays, every time we hope that this is going to be the last time. But as you can see, today is 1900 days. 1900 days. And we're still doing it. And we're all very sad by it.
Yeah, just admire your courage and your persistence and determination. Jeff, I just want to welcome you to the programme. It's a real privilege to have you on the programme today, particularly with your vast experience in dealing with conflict areas around the world. Can you share with our viewers something about yourself and the work that you do at the International Committee of the Red Cross?
Thank you. Well, our role and our responsibility is to look after, take care of, follow the needs of victims of armed conflict and violence across the world. That's the job that was given to us by the international community, by the states. It's written into the Geneva Conventions. We were set up as an organisation to be present when there is armed conflict, to be present when there is violence, and where people who are victims of that violence and victims of that conflict need protection and need assistance, to work towards the provision of that protection and assistance for them. Now, much of that must come from the authorities. The protection in particular comes from the authorities. They have a responsibility and an obligation to look after people under their control and to look after whether they are wounded people, whether they are civilian people, whether they are people who are in prison. It's the authorities who have the obligation to look after them, to treat them correctly. And our role is to monitor that and to remind and call on the authorities to exercise their responsibilities appropriately. And that's what we try to do, and that's what we try to do all over the world.
And it's very, very vital work that you do, isn't it? Particularly in protecting prisoners of war, making sure that there's proper humanitarian treatment of prisoners in armed conflicts.
We believe that we're there to represent the interests of the victims of war, and we must accept that armed conflict is a feature of our lives. It's a feature of our world. It has been for a long time. It is also a feature of our world that when violence is used, there are victims and there are innocent victims, and there are people who have no particular interest in the violence or in the conflict, but who become a victim of it, and they are entitled to legal protections. These are legal protections that the community of states has put in place that are a set of minimum standards against which everybody must be treated, whether they are prisoners, whether they are wounded. Wounded must be treated the same as if they were from one's own army. Prisoners must have contact with their families, and I think today we remember the family of Gilad Shalit. He is one of many people who have been detained in relation to various situations of violence and armed conflict, and his family are suffering as he is suffering enormously.
We've got a clip to go to now. This is produced by Noam, Gilad Shalit's father, really marking the 6th anniversary of his kidnapping and his captivity.
I am Noam Shalit, Gilad Shalit's father. For 5 long years, me and my wife Aviva have had one wish, to see our son come home. For 5 long years, our young son Gilad has been held hostage as a bargaining chip by his captors, the Hamas leaders, with no basic human rights, in total isolation, and clearly against international and humanitarian law. The Hamas leaders keep ignoring all calls from the international community for the immediate and unconditional release of Gilad. We, Gilad's family and friends, miss him very much after 5 years of not having him with us. He will be 25 years old, and we ask of all the people of the free world to help us to free Gilad before it will be too late, and to enable him to celebrate his 25th birthday at home. Thank you very much.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report there, where we saw pictures of Gilad Shalit in his childhood, very happy, and also pictures of his latest pictures in captivity. No one's heard from Gilad Shalit since October 2009. The next clip we're going to go to looks at the foundational work of the International Red Cross.
It was June 1859. A lone carriage struggled across northern Italy. The gentleman inside, the Geneva merchant Henri Dunant, was on important business. He was determined to be given an audience by Napoleon III, the powerful Emperor of France. Dunant knew that Napoleon was now somewhere nearby with his troops. Dunant suddenly found himself in the midst of a battlefield. Dunant was horrified. Outside the normally quiet village of Solferino, the French and Austrian armies were fighting a terrible battle. By evening, thousands lay dead, dying and wounded. But the medical troops simply could not cope, and the weary and bloodied soldiers on both sides had enough to do just saving themselves and finding their way back to their lines. Dunant forgot all else. Help was crucially needed. Resolutely, he set up a makeshift hospital in a church in the village, where the dying and wounded could receive attention and care in peace and quiet. He was joined by the villagers, the women, the elderly, who tried to help as best they could. They treated the French and Austrians alike, even taking care to record and send their last goodbyes to loved ones. Day and night they worked tirelessly, nursing the victims. Dunant finally returned to Switzerland, but he could not forget. His book, A Memory of Solferino, was published in 1862. Dunant proposed the establishment in every country of a neutral, independent body of helpers who could provide protection and care for the wounded in case of war, regardless of side. The idea was revolutionary and had found willing ears. Shortly afterwards, Dunant and 4 other men formed the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC. In 1864, an international diplomatic conference in Geneva was called. The result was the adoption of the First Geneva Convention for Neutral Humanitarian Aid and Protection for Wounded Soldiers. Many years later, following the First and Second World Wars, other visionaries added more Geneva Conventions. These help protect wounded, sick, or shipwrecked sailors, prisoners of war, and civilians affected by war. But it was Henri Dunant whose initiative and enterprise paved the way and made a difference, showing humanity amidst inhumanity.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. Just shows you the origins of the work of the Red Cross and the very important work they do in helping in conflict situations. Hemda, it's now been over, well, it marks the 6th anniversary since Gilad has been captured by Hamas and just celebrated his 25th anniversary. Can you give us an update on his current situation, or do we know?
Well, as you mentioned before, we have not heard anything from him since October 2009. It's nearly 2 years. And we don't know his situation at all. There haven't been any messages. The indication from Hamas is that he's still alive and they're still negotiating. But there hasn't been any other message or any proof or anything to make us feel that he's all right. And we're very concerned. The family is very concerned about his state of mind, even if physically he's okay, what is he like, his psychological suffering, and we don't know.
And Jeff, I mean, all attempts by the International Committee for the Red Cross have tried to visit Gilad when he's been held in captivity, but Hamas have refused this to happen. You're probably the best person to know. Why are Hamas refusing the Red Cross to visit Gilad?
Well, we have kept it as a priority for more than 5 years. It remains a priority. We have spoken with Hamas repeatedly. We've spoken at the most senior levels. We have repeated our requests. We've repeated our offer to visit. There is no legal obligation to let us visit. There's certainly a humanitarian, moral imperative that he is visited. But there is a legal obligation on his captors to protect his life. There's a legal obligation on them to treat him humanely, and there is a legal obligation to allow him constant contact with his family. His family have absolutely the right to know, the right to be in communication, the right to understand his situation. These are legal obligations on his captors, and these are the areas we are focusing on in our discussions.
You say Hamas is under legal obligation. What are the consequences if they don't follow through with their legal obligations?
Well, the body of law that governs the sanctions relating to the violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law is a complex work, and it relies on the political will and the capacity of the international community to take action in relation to the non-adherence to international humanitarian law or human rights law. This is an area of work that the ICRC focuses on a great deal around the world. We believe that if there was greater compliance with the law as it exists, that there would be far fewer victims of armed conflict, and war would be that balance that the Geneva Conventions tries to establish between, on one side, military necessity, and on the other side, the respect of human dignity, would be a balance that we would observe in the conduct of hostilities, and that's what we constantly remind states who are engaged in conflict, but not only states, also all armed groups involved in conflict. These are the discussions that we have.
And Hemda, I mean, can you give us some indication about how Gilad's parents are feeling, Noam and Aviva, and her brothers, coping with him being detained for over 5 years now, and also, just celebrate his 25th birthday as well. And how can Christians really support and rally around his parents and his family at this time, including yourself?
Thank you. It is terrible. I speak to Noam every week or two. I speak to his father weekly. I think they have to be strong. There is no choice. I mean, that is something, and you can see from the clips. When it's your child, you have to be strong. You have to go on. We all have to go on until we hope Gilad is released. But underneath, I think they're quite depressed. They're quite desperate. I think both of them. It shows more on Aviva, his mother. Noam is quite self-contained and strong person, and he is holding himself quite well. His grandfather also, obviously, that's where Noam got it from, is a very strong person. His grandmother completely fell apart. She's very ill. It's very, very difficult, but we have to go on. I get up in the morning and I think Gilad should know that we are thinking of him now. And if more people think about him more often, and just more people do just one thing occasionally to help, I think that will make a big difference.
We've got a clip to go to now which shows the last recorded video of Gilad Shalit back in October of 2009, and it's very poignant to make the point that no one has heard about his plight since.
שלום, אני גלעד בן נועם ואביבה שליט, אח של הדס ויואל שגר במצפה הילה. תעודת הזהות שלי היא 3970-29. היום הוא יום שני, 14/9/2009. כפי שאתם רואים, אני מחזיק בידי את העיתון פלסטין של היום, 14/9/2009, יוצא בעזה. אני קורא בעיתון במטרה למצוא מידע לגביי, ומקווה למצוא מידע כלשהו שיבשר לי על שחרורי ועל חזרתי הביתה בקרוב. אני מקווה ומחכה כבר תקופה ארוכה ליום שבו אשתחרר. אני מקווה שהממשלה הנוכחית בראשות בנימין נתניהו לא תבזבז כעת את ההזדמנות להגיע לסיכום העסקה, וכתוצאה מכך אני אוכל סוף סוף להגשים את חלומי ולהשתחרר. אני רוצה למסור דרישת שלום למשפחתי ולומר להם שאני אוהב אותם ומתגעגע אליהם מאוד ומייחל היום שיראה אותם שוב. אבא, יואל והדס, האם אתם זוכרים את היום שבו הגעתם לבסיס שלי ברמת הגולן בתאריך 31/12/2005, שאם אני לא טועה נקרא רוויה ב'. עשינו סיור מסביב לבסיס וצילמתם אותי על טנק המרכבה ועל אחד הטנקים הישנים בכניסה לבסיס. אחר כך נסענו למסעדה באחד הכפרים הדרוזים, ובדרך הצטלמנו בצידי הכביש על רקע החרמון המושלג. אני רוצה לומר לכם שאני מרגיש טוב מבחינה בריאותית, והמג'הדין מגדודי אל-זדין אל-קסאם מתייחסים אליי מצוין. תודה רבה ולהתראות.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. That was the last time anyone has seen anything of Gilad Shalit. Jeff, there's been remarks, a recent article by Gilad Shalit's father, Noam, and has very strong criticism of the Red Cross and its handling this situation. And he's really saying that the Red Cross hasn't been resolute enough in their discussions with Hamas. Can you explain some of the difficulties that your organisation has had in dealing with Hamas in trying to get some sort of visit?
Well, let me give a little bit of context, perhaps, to our work when it comes to detainees. We visit 500,000 detainees in 70 countries around the world. Most of the detainees that we visit, states are not obliged to give us access. States are obliged, and non-state actors such as Hamas and others are obliged to provide access to the Red Cross if it's an international armed conflict. The Geneva Conventions make that very clear. If there's an international armed conflict, we are provided with, there's an obligation on states. Now, states can always refuse that obligation. States have that authority. Everybody has that authority to refuse a request. In this situation regarding Gilad Shalit, who remains in captivity, what we can do, because we consider that he is protected under Common Article 3 of the 4 Geneva Conventions, which covers non-international armed conflict, because there is not two states involved in that situation, we can offer our services to the captors, to Hamas, and ask them to give us access. That's what we can do. That's what we can do anywhere in the world. That's what we do in 70 countries, nearly 70 countries. We offer the services of the Red Cross to go and visit people that are held in captivity for political security or other reasons. Those holding the prisoners, the detainees, the captives, they can say no. They can say no. We can only offer our services. Now, how do we offer our services? Well, we work confidentially. We work confidentially with governments, with other powers. We do not make public demands. In the case of Gilad Shalit, we have made public statements and public criticisms. This is very unusual and very exceptional. But we felt that because we did not receive a positive response to our repeated requests, as I said to you, at the highest levels, we felt it was important to say this publicly. But we do not speak publicly in general. We continue knocking on doors. We continue trying to use the powers of persuasion, to use the humanitarian nature of our work to convince people to give access. We do not have the capacity to open the doors behind which people are kept captive. We do not. That is the responsibility of political authorities, and it is only the political authorities that can actually open those doors to us. And all we can do, and it's a lot, is knock on those doors, and we knock on those doors all the time. There hardly is a week that goes by that we don't knock on those doors. Right around the world, we're speaking about this particular situation of Gilad Shalit. But I would really remind us all, and certainly want to remind your viewers, that we're talking about many, many thousands of detainees that we are constantly seeking access to. And we regret enormously that this has been denied to us. We regret enormously. We've said we regret enormously, and we continue to call for access. We continue to ask for access on a humanitarian basis, because there is an obligation on his captors to treat him humanely, to protect his life, and to allow him that contact with the family, and that's our work.
Yeah. And Hemdi, I think you had a question that you wanted to ask Jeff. In light of Hamas being afraid of allowing the International Red Cross access to see Hamas because they could discover his location.
Yeah. I think the question came when I spoke to my cousin Gilad's grandfather yesterday, when I knew I was going to meet him. And I said to him, what would you like to ask the representative of the Red Cross? And it is apparent to us that part of the reason that Hamas is not allowing any visit is their fear that his position will be discovered through the visit. And so we wanted to ask, what are the conditions under which the Red Cross agree to visit prisoners or detainees? How far will they go in terms of sending people totally undercover, maybe even blindfolded as they travel, so they're not discovered? How far will they go in order to actually see someone and make the contact?
Thank you. Thank you for this question. I think it is a relevant question. I'll do my best to give as full a response as I can. We are aware that when war and violence are used, there is enormous concern and fear and suspicion about information that can reveal some advantages to other sides. We are not in the business of war, but we are in the business of humanitarian aspect. And that's the reason why we work always confidentially. What we do in private. We provide our feedback in private. We visit in private. We guarantee not to share information with third parties or external parties under some limits. Now, in terms of physical access to places of detention, we will be extremely pragmatic. We are extremely pragmatic. We will, of course, ask questions about the security of our own colleagues. We will not put our colleagues in danger if we believe that they are in danger. But in many parts of the world, we are known, we are respected. As a humanitarian agency, we do not fear that insecurity. After that, we are certainly open to complying with a number of restrictions or limits in terms of reaching a place of detention if the location and identity of that place of detention needed to remain, for whatever reason, undisclosed. That would be a matter we would need to discuss with the captors directly. What we insist on in a visit, and there's a number of things, but I think the one that is most important in this case is that we are allowed to conduct a private interview with no witnesses, nobody can monitor, it's a private conversation, and that part of that conversation will allow for, in this case, Gilad to be able to write a message to his family. Those are two basic humanitarian principles, but I think in terms of how we reach a place of detention, we are ready to discuss that with concerned captors. It's the place of detention. Our focus is on the individual. Our focus is on reaching the person, having a private conversation with the person, and being able to repeat it. We need to be able to go back. We need to do it not once. We need to be able to repeat our visits in order to ensure that the situation is not presented one way and then the situation changes.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation. Very, very informative, Jeff. Right, I just have a statement today. This is from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office on the situation of the British government towards Gilad Shalit. It says that this is what the British government say. So we will continue to call for the unconditional and immediate release of Gilad Shalit, as the Foreign Secretary William Hague said in June of this year, on the 5th anniversary of the kidnap of the Israeli staff sergeant Gilad Shalit. We remember his family and call again for his immediate release. For 5 years, Gilad Shalit's parents, Noam and Aviva, have been waiting for his return and praying that each day should be the last day of his captivity. It's unacceptable that Gilad Shalit is being held by Hamas without any access to the Red Cross. They go on to say, Hamas must immediately allow a representative of the Red Cross to visit him. The last sign of life was received on the 2nd of October 2009. Gilad Shalit's family have been waiting for almost 2 years for another such message. It is difficult to imagine the pain and the anguish they must feel. My thoughts are very much with the Gilad and his family on this day. I call again for Hamas to release Gilad Shalit immediately and unconditionally. Jeff, when you have statements made by the British government and the Foreign and Commonwealth in particular with very, very strong message to Hamas, does this help support the important work you're doing in order to try and gain access to Gilad?
We welcome all measures and all steps that go towards the humanitarian plight of persons who are deprived of their freedom. It is the choice of states what statements to make. Our role is to focus on the humanitarian concern. Anything that can help the humanitarian nature of this problem is one that we welcome. Our focus is on treatment and conditions of all detainees, of treatment and conditions of Gilad Shalit at this time, on family contact that he must be allowed to have. Our role is not one that negotiates or is involved in any eventual release. I would just like to clarify that and be precise that our role is about how he is being treated, and that he has contact with his families. This is priority, and we welcome any measures that can reinforce that humanitarian priority as being an area that we must focus on. We must continue to focus that regardless of political differences or any other differences between people in the world, we are all individuals. We must all be allowed to live with self-respect, with our human dignity, and that means being in contact with our families and living in humane conditions and treatment.
And Hemda, what was your response to that statement by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office? I mean, it's a very, very strong statement by the British government.
I feel heartened by it. I think it's really important. It's a very clear message, and it deals with both aspects. One of them, which Jeff deals with as well, is the humanitarian issue, and the other one is the fact that we have to remember that Gilad is entering his 6th years in captivity now, and it's a very long time. I was saying to my cousin about when it was 5 years, it's nearly as long as the Second World War. It's getting that long, and we have to remember how long people were prisoners of war then. And I really am grateful to the British government for such a strong statement. I think it is important. I think although Hamas is appearing to be oblivious to pressure, you can see it's a good opportunity to put pressure on them now. And I think people should not shy away from that pressure.
Yeah, we have a clip to go to now that this is called Hamas in Their Own Voices. It'll give you a bit of understanding about the terrorist organisation Hamas.
Hamas, founded in 1988, is designated by the United States and European Union as a terrorist organization. Over the past few years, Hamas terrorist attacks and actions have made news. A week before fighting erupted in Gaza, Hamas's leader from Damascus put an end to a short-lived truce with Israel. This, in their own voices, is Hamas.
هي عاصمة الكاثوليك أو الصليبية التي أعلنت عداءها للإسلام ليمنعوا نهضة الإسلام من جديد، ستكون عاصمتهم نقطة متقدمة للفتوحات الإسلامية التي تنساح في أوروبا كلها، ثم تلتفت إلى الأمريكتين بل إلى أوروبا الشرقية. أنتم الأعلون.
Hamas leaders call for the annihilation of Israel and of all Jews, for death to and annihilation of America, and for the Islamic conquest of the world.
أيها الأمريكان سيعاقبكم الله أن يعلن الله الحرب عليكم يا آكلي الربا. العلم الأمريكي بفضل الله سبحانه وتعالى. هيئوا كل التحية إلى المقاومة الأفغانية في أفغانستان التي تمرغ أنف جيش أمريكا.
أنكم وكأن الذي قتل يهودي واحد كأنه قتل 30 مليون يهودي.
مسلمين لثأرا لا والله لن ينقضي
على يهود هنا في فلسطين. هذا من أروع ألوان البركة الحقيقية لفلسطين.
الله أكبر من أمريكا وأكبر من القوى العظمى، ونقول لهذا الغرب ستهزمون والله. والأمة العربية والإسلامية اليوم صاعدة ناهضة، سوف تستعيد زعامة العالم. الموت لإسرائيل، الموت لأمريكا، الموت لأمريكا.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. Jeff, in dealing with these very important issues, and you're doing extremely important and vital work around the world, how do you deal with the fact when you're dealing with conventional wars and both sides comply with the Geneva Convention? How does the International Red Cross deal with situations such as Hamas, who refuse to abide by the third article of the Geneva Convention?
I think, as I mentioned earlier, we really think that compliance with the Geneva Conventions by all armies in all wars would make the world and would make war more humane. This applies across the board. This applies to all wars in all contexts. The role we have been given is to remind those taking part in wars of their obligations, to protect civilians, to give access to us to visit detainees, to treat detainees correctly, to allow them contact with their families. That's the job that we do. Any acts that violate humanitarian law are outlawed. Any acts that are called terrorist acts, these are illegal acts. These are in violation of the laws of war, and they're in violation of domestic laws. It does not matter who commits these acts. They are breaking the laws that have been created by the community of states. Whether those laws are broken by states, whether those laws are broken by actors who are not parts of states, our job remains precisely to remind those engaged in war, those engaged in violence, those engaged in taking acts that affect civilians, and reminding them of the humanitarian consequences. They have an obligation to protect civilians. Everybody has an obligation to protect civilians. The form of that war, well, we know a lot about armed conflict. We work in armed conflict. So we know the various acts that are committed, and we constantly remind everybody. They are responsible for their behaviours. Armies, their political leaders are responsible. There's armed conflict all over the world at the moment. And we would like, and we do in all of those armed conflicts, monitor very carefully the behaviour of soldiers, and governments and non-state actors appreciate the feedback that we can give them on this.
Going back particularly to Gilad Shalit's case, now, in your opinion, because he's received such a visible and high-profile media campaign throughout the world, I know enough everyone knows his plight, we're doing a programme on it today, does this help or does this hinder your work?
I think I'm working for a long time in this business, and I'm very heartened in recent years to see humanitarian values, humanitarian action, humanitarian access being ones that are much more mainstream. People are talking about them much more. People are focusing about them much more than 25, than a generation ago when I started out. This is good. This is good. We are all humanitarians. We are all humanitarians. The Red Cross does not have a monopoly on being humanitarian. And it's great to see that we are all concerned by humanitarian issues, that we're concerned about the humanitarian treatment of people. This is the case of Gilad Shalit is one that needs to be highlighted. It's not the only one. Of course it's not the only one, but every single one is equally important. And if we can remember that his case is one that is repeated elsewhere, and that this campaign is also, I'm sure, speaking on behalf of other people. And I would perhaps just recall that for decades we've been able to bring families from Gaza to visit their loved ones in Israeli prisons, and that has now been stopped. We're not able to do it, and we regret that. We think we think that they should be able to visit their loved ones, because being in detention, we do not take a position on crimes or not crime. We take a position on treatment conditions and the right of detainees and prisoners to have contact with their families.
Hemda, I mean, we were discussing there that there's been a number of attempts, international diplomacy attempts to see if to gain access to Gilad Shalit, coming from the Russian President Medvedev to former US President Jimmy Carter. Do you know if any other current diplomatic initiatives that are underway?
Not to my knowledge. What you said about this keeping things quiet or not quiet surfaced quite a few times throughout the last 5 years. I remember at the beginning, Noam used to say to me, well, we're trying, we're hoping to have this pathway to Hamas, which we mustn't publicize, or this way to discuss this deal or that deal. At the end of the day, all these quiet deals didn't come to very much. There were a few hopes in the last month or so when Mashal went to Egypt, and we thought maybe something is going to happen because of what's happening in the Middle East, the Arab Spring. The situation in Syria is particularly influential. But nothing. Absolutely nothing.
So what can be done, in your opinion? I mean, I've been in Israel, and I've seen the rallies that have taken place for Gilad Shalit, and it almost affects the Israeli conscience, particularly because, you know, part of the doctrine of the Israeli Defense Force is that we won't leave one soldier behind. So in a sense, this issue becomes an issue that affects all Israelis, because so many of the Israeli families, their sons and their daughters serve in the military.
The two things here. There is the campaign in Israel, which is very much to do with the family looking after the child. We're not going to let go. Not the Shalit family, I mean the Israeli society as a family. And there is the campaign outside, which is the humanitarian campaign. There's the campaign of the relief and the campaign of the humanitarian campaign. And I'm looking to some sanctions that maybe the Red Cross could bring up. I don't talk about economic sanctions and that sort of thing, because that's not one. I mean, some sort of saying enough is enough, and we will not do this unless you do that, or something like that. I don't know. Yeah. And we have to keep going in any other way as well. You know, we can't stop because Gilad is still there. And there's no end until he's back.
Jeff, in your opinion, you know, what can the international community do to put more pressure on Hamas to ensure that you have access to him, so that he can receive letters from his family, from his loved ones, and that people know that he's okay and he's in good health and in good condition?
I don't think it's for us to know and to speak for what political community could or should do. I think that is a matter for them. We have spoken out. We've spoken out very loudly. We've spoken out very critically. We've spoken out very exceptionally on this case. We continue. We're an extremely stubborn organisation, and we continue, and we will not stop continuing to try to get access to him, to have him having contact with his family. The international community of states is in the best position to take whatever measures it deems appropriate to secure a humanitarian priority in this case. There are other questions, certainly. They're not of our competence or expertise, but the humanitarian part of this is undeniable, unmistakable, rather clear, and must also receive the prominence that it deserves, and that the campaign of Hemda has been focusing on, and the family have been focusing on, absolutely correctly.
And Hemda, we're almost coming down to the end of the programme, so about 2 minutes left. But for our viewers who are very much concerned about the plight of Gilad Shalit, what can they do and how can they get involved? And maybe you just want to address the camera with this answer.
In the flyers we got, we say to contact Jeff. However, I think it's important that, as Jeff said, the political class is also active. And write to your MP, write to anybody you trust in the House of Lords. Make them know that you care, that the political class know that it's not just a political game, but that people do care, and they should know that. And every letter that is written makes a difference, so please do that.
And we've seen that really with a very strong support from the Foreign Office. In really, it's a very strong language against Hamas regarding his captivity.
I know, but I think it's more than just the Foreign Office, which I suppose it's like the cabinet. That is the House of Parliament, that your MP should know you do care about it a lot, and that is important. And the rest of the political class should also know that you care about it. Because if you don't say it, it will sort of diminish from the campaign. People say the public opinion is not behind it. And that needs to be strengthened.
Okay. I think, Hemda, there's a great deal of support from the Christian community in terms of Gilad Shalit, and certainly very much welcome, Jeff, you onto the programme, discussing really the very, very important work that you do. And I'm sure the viewers can find, if you've got a website they can go to find out more information.
Absolutely. www.icrc.org.
Okay. Just want to thank you very much for joining us on the Middle East Report. This programme, the Middle East Report, today has been a tribute to Gilad Shalit. So thank you for watching this very, very important programme today.